Hi there. My name is Annie DeFallow. I am a pediatric speech language pathologist specialized in the area of selective mutism and the founder of our Brave Voices, which is a company devoted to supporting students who school teams who have a student with selective mutism. I am going to share some information with you about using a total communication approach for all students, regardless of the name of their area of struggle or struggles. And so without further ado, I will share slides and begin. Okay, so using a total communication approach in the classroom. Um, why is it important for us to be talking about this? Well, there are a variety of students that have communication struggles, and the list below, all the different names that I have are just a few examples. And some of the students that you will be working with have one area of struggle, some have multiple areas of struggle. They might have both cerebral palsy and also social anxiety. They might have speech and language disorders and also selective mutism. They may have autistic disorder and also cognitive delays. There can be more than one area of struggle, or there can be one. But the point being, there are many different types of students that have communication struggles and that benefit from the use of a total communication approach. So something really important for us to be spending some time reviewing. What is total communication? From Webster's Dictionary, total communication is an approach to communicating that aims to make use of a number of modes of communication, such as signed, oral, auditory, written, and visual aids, depending on the particular needs and abilities of the person. And I think that's an important point at the end, that the given modes will vary depending on the particular needs and the abilities of the person. Because again, we're going to be talking about a lot of different student populations that you'll be working with. So before we dig into a more relatable version of what a total communication approach is, I want to just pause and mention how important nonverbal communication is, even for folks like myself and perhaps you, who are mainly verbal communicators. The research dating back to the 1960s tells us that nonverbal communication is greater than 50% of our communication, even for verbal communicators. And depending on what study you look at, the percentage varies. One very interesting study from 1963 suggested that nonverbal communication is 93% of communication. But regardless of the percentage reflected, there is a consensus that nonverbal communication is more than 50%. So it's really important and impactful. And another way to look at that is that even if you yourself are primarily a verbal communicator, you have a lot of experience with nonverbal communication because you use it all the time. Other things that impact our message include our tone and our voice, and then our actual verbal communication. It is the smallest percentage of our overall communication in intentions and messages. So an example of that would be if you said to me, "Good morning, Annie, how are you?" And I said, "I'm well today. How are you doing?" My affect, the tone of my voice, the brightness of my expression, all contribute to my verbal message, which is, I'm well today. How are you?" Conversely, if I use those same words, but use a different tone and different facial expression, my response to your question becomes, "I'm well today. How are you?" Right. And all of a sudden, it's a really different message, even though my verbal message stayed the same. And so just recognizing that nonverbal communication is hugely impactful. And I would invite yourselves to step into your power and see what expertise you're already bringing to the classroom, given your years of experience as a communicator and how much nonverbal communicating you do. So I mentioned and listed a variety of different struggles that students may be experiencing that lead to communication struggles. So it's natural that your students are going to be using different levels of communication. You may have some really early communicators that are using more pre-linguistic communication. You may have some really, really skillful students that are able to communicate with you at a conversational level using their AAC device or their alternative augmentative communication device. So just recognizing how vast the student profiles will be, which is both exciting and can also be overwhelming at times, but just noting the individuality that's there, even though many of your students will all be using a communication approach, that total communication approach will look very different student to student. So, what are some ways that students might communicate with you nonverbally? They might use gestures like thumbs up and thumbs down. They might use signs via American Sign Language or ASL, like yes and no, or eat or bathroom. They might use signals. I think we all recognize the universal pee pee dance as communicating the message. I need to use the bathroom. Eye contact is a hugely important and powerful ways that we communicate with students and that students communicate with us. Facial expressions, as I mentioned previously, AAC devices, are informally called the talker, are utilized by many of our students. And again, depending on your given student's skills and abilities, they might be using whiteboards to write and or draw their message. They may be using Google Chat, and I am seeing more and more school teams authorize cell phone use and issue cell phones, school issued cell phones to students if texting is the mode of communication that best helps that given student with to best access their academic and social learning. So what does that look like? What does this look like? It looks like you modeling different forms of communication and also receiving a variety of different forms of communication from your students that use more than one modality to communicate. And many of our students that use a total communication approach will use more than one modality within the same exchange to convey their message. Um, many moons ago, early in my career as a speech language pathologist, I met a student who had such severe childhood apraxia speech that they were never going to have verbal communication. They could not form their speech sounds clearly and put their sounds together in order to clearly form words. But they had a brilliant mind. I am quite sure they are at MIT or somewhere similar these days doing amazing things out in the world. And they used their augmentative communication device in combination with gestures and a few signs. They used eye contact and facial expressions, and they were a very, very strong communicator and could easily communicate at conversational level with a verbal communicator. Um, so that would be on the more skillful side, certainly of students that we see who are nonverbal. But there again is a wide range. I know I keep saying that, but it's so important for you to keep that in mind. Okay, so I think as we're talking about the use of augmentative communication devices, it is important to just briefly mention that the research tells us that devices are underutilized in the classroom. So they often will stay in the backpack and not come out and be a part of that student's day. So if you do have students that have a talker, make sure that it's out, get it out of that backpack, of course, with their permission, get it on the desk, check that battery or make sure it's plugged in so they have that power. Because for many of our students, that device is their voice and we do want them to have access to it. Okay, so important as we're talking about how skillful your students may be in communicating with you using multimodality communication, it's also important to stop and mention that how skillful you are at sending and receiving messages and signals, in addition to how skillful your student is at sending and receiving signals and messages all impact the process. Communication truly is a two-way street, and we know that it's a very dynamic process between communication partners. It's a complicated process between communication partners. I really love this illustration of these two partners leaning against one another's back to mutually support one another and to stay standing upright. And that's really how I think about communication. If in a given day, your student had a really bad night's sleep and they're just not feeling well and they're just using all of their energy and their reserves just to stay calm and regulated and to be doing their work in their school day, then they are not going to have a lot of access or maybe even no access to communication. Um, they're not going to be able to partner with you and have that sending and receiving of messages and that shared exchange. And the same for you. If you've had a really terrible night's sleep, you were up all night with your baby or your doggy or for any other reason, and you are just not feeling well at all, it's going to be really challenging for you to share attention and to engage in two-way communication. It really is a matter of both communication partners being present, being available for the exchange. So just important to hold that in mind. Another important point that I invite you to hold in mind as you're beginning to think about modeling and using total communication approach and receiving multimodality communication from your students is that you may at times potentially encounter a student who is rather dysregulated. They're pretty visibly upset. And in that moment, it's really not an ideal time to try to have a great conversation, to sit down and talk it out with them. I'm going to stop and show you this really amazing visual diagram from ICTO, which is a very well recognized entity in the world. It's the work of Dr. Stanley Greenspan and his amazing research over the years. But I want to show you this chart that looks at some of our basic, it's called functional, emotional, developmental capacities. It's a big mouthful, I know, but capacity one, step one, self-regulation and interest in the world. So your student, you yourself need to be calm and regulated first as a foundational step. Next, that leads to the ability to engage and relate once you are regulated. And once those two pieces are in place, then that is when two-way communication becomes available. And to me, I love the work of DIR Floor Time and thinking about a student's functional, emotional, developmental capacities, thinking about our own functional, emotional, developmental capacities. Because when we're talking about a total communication approach, when we're talking about effective use of that approach to support students who are nonverbal or who have limited access to their verbal communication, we need to be thinking globally about them as a person, as a student, and thinking about how much access do they have in a given moment to communication. And so being calm and regulated is really important. Okay, so clicking back over to the slides now. That is, of course, the slide, the information I just showed you in the chart, the copywritten work from ICTO, and this is a link in your handouts that takes you to their website and to that chart. So if your student in a given moment is visibly distressed, action steps referring to your student's behavioral plan and the other staff members involved with the student will certainly be familiar and help get you up to speed on what that behavioral plan or BIP involves to help a student to, again, feel calm and regulated and ready for communication. And so you can just try that communication again in a calmer moment. I invite you to see all of your students as powerful, as capable, and as motivated to communicate with you. Because of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Just take a moment and notice this student's expression and how much they are communicating with us via this very vibrant expression without any words at all. Some of the students that you encounter may potentially be more dynamic in their profiles. They may be pre-linguistic at that point where they're not yet using words to convey signals and to express their messages. But think about children of your own or children you may have encountered over the years who were very, very young, either chronologically or developmentally, and how effectively they were able to communicate their messages in their own way. I think of when my now 2-year-old daughter was in that birth to 3-month old range, and she did not yet have any words, of course, but she communicated her wants and needs extremely effectively. And we know that about babies, right? They have a cry for hungry, they have a cry for tired, they have comfort sounds, right? And they are incredibly powerful and capable in their ability to let us know what they're needing and how to best meet their needs and care for them. At now 2 years old, her messages sound more like "Mommy want this" and "Mommy want up," and all of those 2-year messages, along with continued great nonverbal communication as well. But what the point that I'm making is that your students have a way that they communicate, regardless of their developmental age, regardless of their list of struggles. They also have a list of strengths. That is their longest list, and they have their own unique way of communicating. And so, when you are assigned to a given classroom and to given students, just checking in with the other staff members that are already involved in the classroom and with those students, and getting up to speed on how that given student might communicate, and in knowing and trusting that in time you will learn their signals, their gestures, their sign. You'll learn their device and the language that is spoken within each given device, and you'll become very, very confident and masterful in communicating with each of your given students. So coming back to the slides, I think I just kind of summed that up, but I do want you to see this as a can-do process, because it is. It absolutely is. And I invite you to see yourself as powerful and capable of receiving messages, of sending messages, and engaging in effective communication using a total communication approach with your students. And a heartfelt thank you for the work that you do every day. You are an agent of change. So I will wrap us up there with a heartfelt thank you and a wish to be well. Bye now.